Light festivals, artificial light festivals, tend to sit around the winter period, and it's a way of lifting up the spirit again during the winter period, and it also points towards retail trade, people going out, people enjoying themselves and celebrating the winter period. As you know, Sydney doesn't get too cold within winter, so this is a great way for people again to celebrate, to be part of a community and to enjoy art.
British musician Brian Eno was asked to select 30 local and international acts as curator of Luminous Music Festival. His designs will be projected onto the Opera House sails from 6 till midnight each night.
I think what I'm most interested in this work is trying to create a situation within which you can experience some kind of surrender, where you stop being you for a little while.
Let's hope the installations will bring a greater awareness to global warming and bring a flood of visitors to the city.
This event will bring around about $10 million into our economy. The event itself, the investment dollar investment that we've made, help creates jobs, keeps the money here in Sydney. Mums and dads, kids, grandparents, aunts, uncles can all come down, and it's free, and yeah, good fun night out.
The event is ongoing until the 14th of June.
I think it started with quite an innocent idea, which was for me to do one of my exhibitions, one of my light shows in Sydney. And I'm a very reluctant traveller, and I thought, I don't want to go all that way just for one show. I was thinking of, global warming and 23 hours on a plane. And so gradually other incentives got added. You could do a lecture as well. You could do a performance, so gradually it turned into a festival, basically.
How did you choose the people who are performing and talking at this festival? Because you like to have a collaboration. What was it about these people that drew you to them?
I think they're all people who have inspired me and who've, in a sense, made a new sort of edge to popular culture, who've pushed the envelope some way or another. So they include comedians, musicians, thinkers, and yes, I think that's what I would characterise them as. They're edge pushers.
And what do you want people to get out of the festival? What is the experience that you're hoping that people will join in with?
Well, I first of all hope that they'll enjoy the festival. That's obviously very important. It's not a didactic experience where I'm trying to teach people something important. But the second thing I hope is that they will learn something important from it, which is that contemporary culture is capable of including a lot of very, very interesting and big ideas in this, that science and art aren't irreconcilable.
Why is that?
There have been all sorts of terrible attempts to make art meet science experiences, and I think they haven't worked very well, but I think they can work well, and I hope there'll be some in this festival.
What do you mean about terrible experiences? What do you mean by that, about art meeting science?
What often happens is when people do art meets science type experiments is that they end up with not very interesting art meeting not very interesting science. And the result is not very interesting.
What part of
Twice
science?
as not very interesting as...
But what part of science and art is meeting in this particular situation?
Well, for example, in my show, one of the important aspects is that it relies on combinatorial mathematics, so that, in fact, you never see the same thing twice. Unless you live for many hundreds of thousands of years, you might see it twice. But the show is constantly rebuilding itself, and this is a different understanding of change from the classical understanding of change. It's a different idea about how things progress and develop. So this is a relatively small number of elements that keep shuffling and keep producing new experiences by their new clusters, by their new forms of clustering.
What about the music or the sound?
The music does the same thing, actually. So the music doesn't repeat. So it's never that different at any point, but it's never exactly the same. So the music is rather like the experience of watching some natural phenomenon like a river, where it's constantly changing, but it's still that river rather than another river.
I feel like you can get lost or sit there for hours, in fact, having sat in it. That's how it feels.
Some people do sit there for hours.
Is that what's happened?
That's why we put comfortable seats in, because sometimes people like to stay for 8 hours, 12 hours even. And sometimes people come back every day, bring their lunch every day and sit there for an hour or two.
And tell me about the way it was done, because you came up with the idea, but you didn't write the software, did you?
No. So the software really started out as the computer version of something that I had previously been doing with slide projectors. So I used to use lots and lots of slide projectors, and I used to individually make the slides. I'd paint them or engrave them or draw them myself, put them in the projectors, and then I would have several projectors projecting onto one screen together. Or not usually a screen, but a kind of object. And the overlay was what made the picture. And then the projectors were programmed to fade in and fade out, but at different times, so they were not synchronized. So there was a constant changing going on. Nothing was ever still. It was always changing, but very, very slowly, and always producing new combinations. So like new hands of cards, but the deck of cards was very large. And with this, the deck of cards is large.
Did you paint all the screens?
Some of them, a few of them were done photographically. Some of them are done in Photoshop in the computer, but the majority of them are handmade, yeah. And they were done over the last 20-odd years, because I started working with the slide projectors in the late 1980s. So the earliest slides in there are from 1988, I think.
Well, that's fantastic. So there's almost like a history there. How has that been received in places like the UK? Has it been a bit controversial, the idea of that art, that even being art? Is that debate going on at all?
Well, I think since England is a class-bound society, there's a lot of sort of moral discussion about whether people should ever do anything other than what they were supposed to have been born to do. So I was obviously born to be a pop musician, and the idea that I might have the temerity to think of myself as an artist is still a bit controversial, even though that's what I studied. I went to art school, and my degree is in fine art, so in fact what I'm doing now is what I was educated for doing, what I've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years as a musician. I had absolutely no education for whatsoever.
But that's really weird. So do they have a problem with the actual art itself, or you doing it?
I think I've always noticed in England, if somebody says, "What do you do?" and you say, "I'm a musician," they say, "Oh, that's interesting." And then you say, "And an artist too," they go, "Oh." It's like this fear of dilettantism. You can't possibly have two jobs. If you have two jobs, that means you're not doing either of them properly. That's the sort of background to that kind of thinking.
You managed to cram a lot in, though.
Yeah, I've got 4 jobs.
That's right. What are they, by the way? I know about 2.
So I do music, my own. I produce other people. That's quite a different job. I do exhibitions like this, and I'm a lecturer as well. I do a lot of theoretical stuff, which is to say that I speak to students. I'm a professor, so I speak to students.
Are you a professor or one of those honorary ones?
No, I'm a real one.
Oh, Ian, I'm sorry, I must have missed that. Because I know Tony Blair had you around to chat about communications and things like that. What's your professorship in?
Time-based media.
Oh, no wonder he had you over.
What you're doing here.
What does that mean, time-based media?
It means
you
anything...
Wait, have a drink. Sorry about that. You're reaching for the drink and I've interrupted you. My apologies. No, sorry. Time-based media, is that a very new? Oh, I'll wait to have a drink.
Okay. So time-based media is basically anything you can't hang on a wall that stands still. So the traditional fine arts were still essentially, painting and sculpture. Then in the 50s onwards, people started using video, film, performance. So gradually this whole extra body of stuff started growing up, and people didn't really know what to call it. So they call it time-based media. So time-based media is anything called art that moves.
Okay, and where is that movement going? Where do you see it going?
In a sense, it's kind of looking at media that have been around for a long time. For instance, television, possibly the most boring medium on earth, is suddenly being reassessed because of what artists are doing with it. So television, if you think about the history of television, it really grew out of cinema, which really grew out of drama, theatre. So cinema came into existence to present theatre portably, and television came into existence to present something like cinema at home. So that's fine, but each one of those is a kind of reduction of the possibilities of that medium. And cinema came to life, of course, when people realized you could do things that you could never do in a theatre. You could do close-ups, you could have points of view changing all the time. You could jump forward and backward in time and in location. Television came into its own when we discovered there were things you could do with television that you couldn't do with film or with theatre. Things very often to do with social intrusiveness or with real-time watching of situations developing. What I think artists start to realize is that so I should add to that both of them, both what cinema did and what television did, were still hinged on the idea of these media being in existence to contain narrative, to contain that kind of content that had beginning, middle, end, that had story and involved humans and blah, blah, blah. So in about 1978, I got a video camera and started playing with video. And the first thing I realized was that, to me, what really was interesting about video was that it was a new way of manipulating light. So telling stories and so on, that's all fine, but it's a sub-department of this bigger issue of television exists to be able to present you with precisely controlled light. That's what TV is. It's light, It's not stories. Stories is one of the things you can tell with light, but actually you can make pictures with light as well. So it's a little bit like in the early 20th century when painters discovered that their boxes of paints were not just ways of representing the outside world. They were actual colours. They were things you could use in themselves. And so with that you had the birth of abstraction. And I think what happened with film and television recently is that people started to realize that these were media that had their own internal message and dynamic. They didn't have to be just carriers for another set of messages.
That's really interesting. It's like the Impressionists when they used lots of paint, and the paint itself became almost you created the image, but the paint itself, the texture, was integral to the painting itself.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yes. So go the step forward from that, where you say, actually, I don't particularly want an image in there. I just want the experience of the colours.
Is that what that is?
To some extent. Obviously, there are images there, but they keep changing, and they're not really referential. Very few of them, anyway. So I think what excites me is presenting an experience that you can't easily locate. You can't easily say, oh yeah, that's one of those. That's that kind of thing. I've seen things like that before. I like making things where you think, I've never seen anything quite like this before, but I like it.
That's the way you approach many things in what you have done. I don't want to dwell too much on the music, but I can't ignore it either. What is it that attracts you to work with, say, a particular artist as a music producer?
I suppose what I think about is, can I do something musically here that I wouldn't be able to do on my own? That's very often what I'm thinking. So I see somebody else doing something and I think, I like what they're up to. I think I could make it better, and I think it could make me better as well. So I'm always thinking of a transaction, really. Similarly with teaching, actually, I'm interested in teaching the people who I think I can steal some good ideas from. And the deal is that they can steal some of mine as well.
What's it like when you are collaborating with a particular artist? David Byrne said in the studio, you throw up a lot of ideas and there's a very rapid-fire ping-pong exchange between you. When do you know you've got it? Can that go on for days, or?
Yes. Well, I think you know you've got something pretty quickly. So for quite a long time, you're pushing a big rock up a hill, sometimes, and you know it's not there yet. But at a certain point, the point where you reach the top of the hill, it starts to gather its own momentum, and then you're following it rather than pushing it.
Do you and the artist know it, or do you just know it?
Sometimes we don't know it at the same time. So sometimes I sense it sooner than they do, or sometimes they sense it when I think, no, it's not there yet. This isn't the place yet.
Is it hard to convince particular artists when it's there? Do you ever have any friction?
Yes, there's often friction, but it's not unpleasant friction usually. It's more, go on then, show me. You think there's something there? Show me. I don't get it. It's that kind of friction.
You don't pull a gun on them or anything like that?
Not the gun. I use the flamethrower quite a lot.
Do you see yourself as a composer?
Yeah. In a funny definition of that word, yes. Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people do seek you out. Are there people you knock back?
What does that mean?
Knock back. Oh, sorry, it's an Australian expression. Are there people that you decline to work with?
Oh, yes.
Why would you not work with someone, for example?
Well, partly because I don't have infinite time. So I want to do my own work, and that occupies a few different departments. So I really work with other people as efficiently as I can, which is to say, I don't, for example, sit in the studio day in and day out from beginning to end of a project. It's not useful. My usefulness, I think, is to come in with a fresh eye or a fresh ear and say, that's not working, that's brilliant, this is controversial, we need something like this that's missing. So I kind of try to look at a bigger picture of the thing and take advantage of the fact that I'm not immersed in the details of it all the time.
Did you ever, when you first started out and you were at art school, did you always feel that you would always be making art or doing art, and when you got sidetracked into, as you say, into music, did you ever think that one would suffer as a result of the other?
No, I didn't. I only stopped working as a visual artist for about 3 or 4 years. So when I left art school, I almost immediately joined a band, which was Roxy Music, and that was in 1971, I think, 70 or 71. And by about 1974 or 75, I was once again starting to make pictures, basically. And by 1978, I was having exhibitions of them. So
these were painted pictures?
No, not really. They were using video mostly. Video and light.
At that time?
Yeah.
Did not painting interest you at all? You weren't interested in that, in the traditional art media?
I wasn't very good at it. I think what I'm good at is finding a new piece of territory, and I like the fact that there's no competition in it. So, for instance, this stuff I'm doing here, I don't think anybody else is doing anything like it. So it's my little territory, and I'm farming it right now.
Is that how you felt when Paul Simon did Graceland and you were hearing all the African choir and so on? Did you feel a bit uneasy
Yes.
about that?
Well,
is that the same sort of thing, that he was encroaching on your territory?
Well, it wasn't. I didn't ever think it was my territory exactly, but I liked the fact of here was a kind of music that I had discovered and was very excited about. It was like when you find your favourite beach and you go there and it's all quiet, nobody else is there. Then one day you turn up and there's 3,400 people with ice creams there. And it felt a bit like that. However, it was sheer snobbery on my part, because the other side of that story is that I would very often hear one of the songs from Graceland and I think, oh, that's great, what is that? And then I'd find out it was Graceland.
Now, tell me, one of your other big passions is the environment, and has been for many years. You will be hosting a discussion with James Thornton. Tell me, what is it about the work that his organisation does that you've seen that has made a tangible difference as far as the environment's concerned?
Well, first of all, what Client Earth, which is the name of Thornton's organisation, does, and of which I'm a patron, it uses existing law and existing legal structures to make governments do what they've promised to do. Because governments sign a lot of legislation saying, you know, we're going to cut carbon emissions on this and we're going to insist on that and so on and so on. And then they don't enforce it. They sign it because it's good for getting a certain section of the population's votes. It looks good, you know. Oh, they've gone green. How wonderful. So it gets signed into law, but then it never gets enforced. So that's the first problem, that there's a lot of good environmental law around that isn't being enforced. So James Thornton heads up a group of lawyers, essentially. They're people who know how to enforce laws. So that's one thing. The second thing is that nearly all environmental groups, nearly all of them, don't have a legal department. So here they are trying to fight quite complicated legal issues without proper advice. So the second thing Client Earth does is it provides a legal framework within which other environmental groups can work. So, for instance, recently a French environmental organisation wanted to take the French government to court for not enforcing its own laws on drift net fishing. So we prepared the case for them and said, this is the case we're going to take to the EU. We're going to take the French government to court, to the EU. When they saw the case, we presented it to the French government first. When they saw it, they immediately started enforcing the law, because they knew they would lose the case, because they knew there was a good legal argument against them. So the third thing that Client Earth does is it advises governments on environmental legislation. So the Dutch government has just hired us to rethink all of their environmental law, which they want to update. It was quite good, it was quite enlightened, but they think now it should be better.
What advice, and I'll wrap, do we have time, or do you want me to go?
That's all right.
All right, I'll give you two wait, I'll be very quick. How do we respond to this whole issue of global warming? I know it's a huge issue, which, you know, are you in favour of things like carbon trading and things of that nature? Do you have an overarching view of how we can stop global warming, given that we've only got a short time to do it? Or try and address it?
That's the key thing, is that we have a short time to do it. And that means that we have to really push forward on a lot of fronts at the same time. So the legislation front is one of them. But the technical fronts are very important as well. And it seems to me that what the governments of the world ought to be thinking about now is something of the scale of the Manhattan Project, which was the project during the Second World War to develop atomic weapons. Actually, an unfortunate comparison, but what they did then, they put together the best scientists in America, a lot of the best scientists from Europe who had been forced out of Europe by the Nazis, gave them everything they wanted and said, make this weapon. There were about 120,000 people involved in that project. Similarly, in England during the war, we had the code-breaking project at Bletchley Park, which again drew together the best people in that area, gave them everything they wanted and said, solve the problem. Well, it can be done, you see. Before the war, the problem of nuclear fission was thought to be uncrackable.
Is this more complicated, though? I mean, this requires governments, industries and so on to comply to various things that might affect their businesses or economies.
Yes.
It's
very, very complicated. It's a very big issue. So the downside of it is that it requires governments all over the world to cooperate with one another. The upside of it is that it requires governments all over the world to cooperate with each other. So the upside could be some kind of new future where the governments learn to be global and some sort of global governance emerges from this. And we really need that, not only for the environment, but for all sorts of other things like, the international trafficking of humans, for instance. That's a problem because we don't have any global system of dealing with it. There are many, many problems that we need some kind of global structure to deal with, and it doesn't exist at the moment. And so the upside of the climate problem, I hope, is that it's going to teach us new ways of working together.
Brian Eno, welcome.
Hello, good morning.
I've been referring to you all week as just Eno. Mm-hmm. Is that all right? That's not offensive?
No, that's what people always used to call me.
Oh, really?
In fact, my first wife always called me Eno and still does. And my oldest daughter calls me Eno.
David Bowie, Heroes, what we're talking 30 years ago?
Yeah, over 31 or 32 years ago.
You would have heard it a million times now. What's the first thing that comes into your mind when you hear those opening synth chords?
Well, funnily enough, I think of Robert Fripp, because he played the guitar on that.
Okay.
That tune is him playing. And I remember the session very well, because Robert flew in from New York and plugged in and played on every song without having heard it once.
Really?
Yeah. He likes working like that.
With monumental pieces like that, do you realise instantly, wow, this is just going to be a worldwide hit that 30 years from now will still be played?
No, I didn't realise that. Well, I knew that was a great song, but I never really imagined that anything that we were doing would have such a long lifespan. So that's been a surprise, actually.
Do you wish some of the things didn't have so long a lifespan? Or
I haven't so far been very embarrassed by anything.
But even some things that are quite successful, you might maybe after a while you just think, I just wish that would go away and I didn't have to deal with it anymore.
Well, yes, I sometimes wish I didn't have to keep talking about them.
Well, let's move on then, if that's all right. Can I read one other bit of your earlier work that I had no idea you were involved in, just about to play it for the listeners? The Windows 95 theme. You composed that?
Yeah, that's probably my most
played work,
most successful work.
How does an arrangement like that come around?
Oh, the advert agency that were working with Microsoft sent me a very funny letter which said, "We'd like you to compose a piece of music that is inspirational, evocative, nostalgic, but futuristic, progressive, fast, slow, blah, blah." There was a list of about 130 adjectives, and then it said, project length 3 3/4 seconds.
And did you go, I've actually got one here already?
No, that was a very interesting project, because at the time I was working on really long, slow pieces of music. And suddenly to be asked to make this sort of like a little tiny jewel, I was making these huge sort of landscape pieces, and to be asked to make something that was that tiny, It was very thrilling.
So is this? Is that a piece of art? Is that a corporate device? Is it a piece of music? What is that? Is it a product?
That's a very interesting question. I've been wondering about that for a long time. Where does it fit into the sort of world of things? And I suppose it's all those things. It's a signature, you know. So it's a piece of art in the same sense that one's signature is a piece of art, in that it doesn't have to be that way. You could just write your name, couldn't you, in simple letters. But everybody chooses to adorn or flourish their name in some way. And I suppose this is Microsoft choosing to flourish its identity in some way.
At the moment, you're expressing your art through music, which is part of the Luminous Festival, but in particular, light, which is the more probably unusual thing for most people to interact with. Why light?
I've been working with light since I was a student, actually. I was an art student, and I studied painting, which is what I have a degree in. But while I was at college, when I was 17, I started working with light and started making little machines to do things with light. They were very clumsy because there wasn't really a technology for doing that. But when video appeared and then computers appeared, I suddenly had the tools I needed.
And light, in the time that you've worked with it, even though it's such a basic thing, it's defined life on Earth, light itself has changed so much in the last 20, 30, 40 years, hasn't it? Now through both things like computers and then our broader issues about the way we generate our light, our consumption of power, etc.
Yes.
Has the medium itself changed in that way, or is it still just light?
No, it's changed hugely. For a start, there are all sorts of new technologies for handling light so that you can do quite fine and precise things with it, which you couldn't do in the past. So it was a difficult medium to use in the past. So it's undergone the same kind of transition as music has undergone with the invention of recording studios. You know, now you have recording studios, you can make music in ways that never could have been done before.
I'm talking with Brian Eno, who's the curator of the Luminous Festival. Is something that deals in things like light in particular, is this a festival for everyone, or is it inherently the sort of thing that only some people will get?
I think it's very easy to get, actually. I've been excited sitting in my show to watch the people coming in and to watch what kind of people came in. And they're certainly not a typical art crowd. It's people who happen to be around the Sydney Opera House, you know, tourists and people with their cameras. And they wander into the show because it's on and it's free. Literally
the phrase, saw your lights on, thought I'd drop in.
Exactly, yeah. And they stay for ages and ages and they're intrigued by it.
What is the show? What does the show mean?
For me, I suppose I've had a project for quite a long time to create places in cities where people can have a kind of experience that you don't normally get in a city. It's the kind of experience that would have perhaps been provided by parks, churches, gentlemen's clubs, those kinds of things in the past, places where you went to retreat and think, actually, or chill out, basically.
But you'd never been to Sydney before this.
No.
Now, does that make it easier for you to come and just be inspired by the place, or had you done a lot of research and had a look at Sydney effectively beforehand?
We did quite a lot of research, yes. So to some extent, these things are transplantable from city to city, but I always want to know what the city's like and what... one thing that surprised me, actually, and which I didn't know before, was what a large Asian population there is here. That I found that really nice. I like Oriental cities, and Sydney is an Oriental city as far as I'm concerned. Does
that affect your work in any sense, or you just feel happier to be here? Or
I feel happy to be here, but it's very nice for me to look into the room where that big piece is showing and see 40 or 50% of the people are Asian. That's not an audience I usually have. I'm usually exhibiting in the West, you know.
Now, and by exhibiting in Sydney, of course, by entering and being part of the Sydney creative scene, you take on our special relationship with Melbourne, the second largest city in Australia. And you might know that when you were announced here, Melbourne were very excited that they had Tiger Woods coming to play golf. How do you see the you versus Tiger thing playing out at the moment?
It's a storm in a teacup for me. I mean, I knew nothing about it before I came, and I wish Tiger Woods very well. Golf is a completely esoteric activity to me. So
makes no sense to you?
Not really, no.
Do you think he'd get
luminous?
Luminous?
I think it's much more abstract than most forms of art.
Do you think he'd get luminous if he walked around the Opera House one day?
I'm sure he'd like it, yeah.
Any chance?
I think it's easy to like.
What about the two of you working together? Say in Canberra, halfway, Woods Eno, at Parliament House.
I think that's a very funny idea.
You have a quick,
I look forward to it.
You have a quick game of putt-putt golf against him, and then he projects some light on a Parliament House, and we decide once and for all who is number one.
I'm looking forward to it. If you can set that up, we'll do it.
What's the one thing you hope to achieve with Luminous, Brian Eno?
What I hope to achieve is some sort of sense of calm and wonder in the people who go there. I'm very pleased when I see people sitting there, and instead of what usually happens in galleries where people walk in, quickly look around and walk out again, read the labels and walk out. What happens with this show is that people walk in, sit down, and stay for a very long time.
You've used the phrase to experience some kind of surrender.
Yeah, surrender is an idea that interests me a lot. I think that a lot of the things humans do, such as religion, sex, drugs, art, I think they're all ways of allowing yourself to surrender. So surrender, of course, is normally taken as a passive verb when you stop doing something. I think of it as an active verb. Surrender is one way of dealing with things, just as control is another way.
Well, best of luck over the next few weeks. We are controlled by the news now, but hopefully over the next few days the people of Sydney will actively surrender to the Luminous Festival. Great to speak to you this morning, Brian Eno.
Thank you.